Hi and welcome to All Things Excel, tips, tricks and plenty of fun for the family, as long as it's Excel based of course. Now this is the third tutorial in the creation of the dynamic dashboard, and we finished off last time by adding the pivot table on the region revenue tab, and I just tidied up the formatting at the top of the pivot table and gave the pivot table a name, region revenue. Alright, we're now in a position to start filling this in. Now what we really need is to fill in that box there as it's linked to the radio buttons. So we'll set it equal to our parameter tab, and of course it's just the lookup. No problem there. So if we go F2 and F4, and that locks that to the cell, and we can copy that to there and there as well. So now when we alter the radio button, it quite nicely changes the heading. Now this table is basically going to pick up the region revenue. Move this tab a little closer so it's easy to work with. And again, now I just want to pick those cells up, copy and paste, and same with those. Alright, now we want our data. So the actual doesn't change, so we can go to the pivot table. Now, for those of you that use pivot tables a lot, this is again an annoyance. The default when you set a reference to a pivot table is to actually have the pivot formula bolted in, which makes copy and paste really no good whatsoever. So what we can do is, if we just move to a normal cell on that worksheet, that's revenue B9, set it to B4, and that is now the cell in the pivot table using a normal reference, and we'll just multiply that by 1000. Now what I've used on this cell and all the cells in this table, I've used millions formatting. So if we go Control and 1 and look to see how I've done the formatting, and if we see those two commas at the end, take them off, they basically group it one comma into thousands, second comma into millions. So it's a good way of getting the format that you want. Now the pivot table is actually in thousands, so I'm having to multiply it by 1000 to get it essentially then to be formatted in terms of millions. As we can see, region view by millions of dollars. Right, so we'll copy that down and add a sum, Alt and W, a quick shortcut for that, and prior year, that's not going to work, we need different formula for that. And now for the year to date, go to the parameter value, year to date actual, and again that's going to be F4, and multiply by 1000. Copy it down. Brilliant. So we've got the first batch of numbers in. Now, before adding the comparatives, let's add the slicer. So down to the revenue. For those of you that aren't familiar with the slicer, it's a way of giving the user of the sheet the ability to alter the filter on a pivot table without actually having to go in and tick select, and graphically it looks very, very nice. So if we click on the pivot table options, and we go to insert slicer. Now we need to specify what we're going to filter on. We're going to filter on the month, and there it is. And we can see we can now pick January, February, March. We can pick all. Now we'll just change the format of this. Right click, slicer, right click, slicer settings. Let's get rid of the header, don't really need it. And I have it 6 by 2, which fits in quite nicely. There we go, get it so we can just see the dates, almost there. And like, you can have different colour schemes, again whatever suits the colours you like. I'll just leave it with the default. Control and X, and then Control and V, and fit it nicely underneath the table. And there we are, and as we can see, the numbers alter with the slicer and no problem whatsoever. Now the next step is to add the prior year. Now this is it's a little more involved. I'm going to use an index formula. Now there are two ways of doing this. One way would be to alter what was in the pivot table. Now that can be done using a macro, and I have done this on occasion, but I find it's a very unstable macro that falls over quite regularly, and you've got to move between the sheet that you're summarizing on and where the pivot table is an active sheet, and it causes the spreadsheet to sort of flip between tabs very quickly, and it's not really a very smooth macro, so I prefer to use an index formula instead. Now the quickest way to do that is to name the range that you want. As luck would have it, I've already named it revenue range. It goes over the bottom of the table a little, but that's so if you add extra rows, there's a little bit of give in it, so we don't necessarily have to be spot on. If you want, you can go into formulas, name manager, region rev, and alter what it points to, but this will work fine. So there is our table. Now we need to put in an indexing formula. Right, so equals index and the array, so it was region revenue, the row number, I think that it was row number 1, and we'll just put the default column, so it's row number 1, and we'll just go for prior year to start with, so that's going to be column number 2. And of course multiply by 1000. Excellent. So let's put the variance in, and let's put in the variance percentage. Fantastic. Very, very easy indeed. Now what we need to do is change that so it becomes dynamic based upon the radio button, and we need to move that across all the other formulas. Now I say I'm coming up to my 10-minute mark, so it's not really a perfect place to end, but again, I don't want to overload you in any one tutorial, so you can see how that index formula works. You've got the slicer. I'll move on to the rest of the table in the next tutorial. So until then, keep up that Excel wizardry, and I'll be back with you soon. keep checking the channel, and as always, email me problems, whatever, and I'll solve them if I can.